You are watching DHTV from California State University, Dominguez Hills.
Okay, in this segment, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the Southwest cultures. We're going to take a look at our ancestors of the Southwest and appreciate their scientific contributions to culture, to tradition, to the reasons why we exist today. And we're going to take a look at the Southwest cultures to understand how they incorporated solstices and equinoxes and followed very carefully the time of day. And so for the Southwest, there are two ways to think of the cultures, and both ways are very accurate on different levels of generality. We'll take a look at the material aspects of the culture as well as the historical characteristics. Now, one is to view the entire area as a series of regional variants on the same basic cultural tradition. See, all of these cultures depended on the corn, bean, squash triad as the major food base. All cultures made excellent pottery, and they were adept at masonry construction. So to view the entire Southwest as local expressions of one tradition is pretty reasonable. But this approach yields only partial truth because each culture differs in their origins and they have quite different early histories. They came only late in their stages of development to achieve a sort of homogeneity through contact, through exchange, and through migration. But what is important to note about the Southwest is that the cultures were based primarily on agriculture in a region that's not at all adapted to farming. See, permanent water for human use has been and continues to be a crucial problem. So the gardening techniques had to be specifically developed to use limited moisture. Now, these Southwest gardeners established flourishing, technologically advanced cultures in the least likely place on the continent. So we're talking about ingenious ecological adaptations to support large populations. Now, what's important to appreciate here is that there is no such thing as a border. So when we talk about the Southwest, we're talking about northern Mexico. When we talk about northern Mexico, we're talking about the Southwest. When we talk about, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, California, Nevada, Arizona, we're also talking about Baja California, Sonora, Sinaloa, we're talking about Chihuahua, we're talking about Durango, and most importantly, Zacatecas. So this is the region that's most important. Now, we call it Southwest culture simply because in our narrow mind in the United States, the experience stops right there at the border, but that's just because of our own human constructs with regards to borders. So when you take a look at this particular map on the historical characteristics, you'll see that everything stops at the border. But all those cultures, they move down into northern Mexico. It's not just in this region itself. This is just a U.S. map. And of course, everything stops. With the Mogollon culture, if you take a look at that green area, it goes all the way down into Durango, all right, into Zacatecas, over to eastern part of Texas. And then there's the Hohokam, which is limited there to Arizona, but the Hohokam go all the way down to Sonora, Sinaloa. But this is, again, a U.S. map, and the United States is very narrow in its interpretation, especially its archaeologists who are very, don't like the idea that perhaps everything is interconnected. And that's one of the things that we're going to be trying to appreciate. We're going to take a look at how our ancestors of the Southwest were scientists, how our ancestors of the Southwest incorporated the solstices and the equinoxes and followed carefully the time of day. So I'm just going to take a look at three major cultures. There are a variety of cultures, but I'm going to take a look at the largest ones, the ones that had state centralized planning communities, and let's appreciate that. But there are many, many other different cultures that are worthy of our attention, but we're just going to concentrate on three of them. So let's go to the first one and let's appreciate what are known as the Mogollon or the Mogollon. The Mogollon. By 2000 BC, these populations are planting a wild pod corn, which is the ancestor of the maize. Later, they're going to hybridize the corn with this wild grass root known as teosinte. It's a wild grass, and this increases the productivity of the new plant over the original corn. Now, the origins and arrival of that corn is in question, but by 1000 BC, the Mogollon culture is horticulturally based using the bean squash maize complex. Now, Mogollon, it means people of the pit houses. They built elaborate mountain homes. They developed an artisan and a priestly class. Their houses were scattered along summits of ridges. Their preferred location was an isolated spot near a strip of cultivable land. Pottery is the hallmark of the Mogollon culture. And there are links of this artisan technology with central Mexico. In fact, the connection to central Mexico is very clear. So there's different stages in the successive development of these cultures in their economic expansion, because they are part of the Chihuahua culture. They move into the areas known as New Mexico. They're a part of West Texas, part of El Paso, up into Pecos. The greatest city that they will build is known as Paquime, which is northwest of Chihuahua City. There's going to be great trading areas up and down the region into Durango. So that's the first group. That's the Mogollon culture. And again, they are using hand technologies by which to develop unique state-centered surplus communities. Now, the second group are the Hohokam. And their origins, with regards to the Hohokam, their origins are very controversial. Perhaps as early as 300 BC, these local archaic peoples are going to adapt farming traits that are similar to those in central Mexico. They established irrigated agriculture, communal villages, and hand technologies. So again, when we take a look at present-day Phoenix, Tucson or Tucson, Nogales, Caborca, Magdalena, Hermosillo, they sit on the grid patterns that were established by the Hohokam. And what the Hohokam mean is the people who came before. It is an O'odham word meaning the people who came before. And what's most important about these peoples is that they established irrigated agriculture, communal villages, and hand technologies, and they were the most skilled desert agriculturalists using stone implements, organized labor, and sheer human will. So the Hohokam created an efficient, lengthy irrigation network from the Salt and the Gila River systems in the north and the Magdalena River system in the south, and they brought them to their farmlands that allowed them to survive in an extreme arid environment against overwhelming odds. They were also known for their artisanally fashioned utilitarian, religious, and ornamental objects. Again, Hohokam is an O'odham word, the native peoples that live there today in that region. They talk about the people who came before, the Hohokam. They built irrigation systems with hand technologies, with shell gorgets that were taken from the Gulf of California, and they fashioned irrigation systems. They were the most skillful agriculturalists. They created these lengthy irrigation networks in the most extreme arid environment of all deserts of the Southwest. Because whenever you go to the Sonoran Desert, those of you who've been out to Phoenix, perhaps Tucson, those of you who traveled to Hermosillo, traveled down to Caborca, or if you know what I'm talking about with regards to the border, it's about 120 degrees in the shade. So we're talking about them building elaborate ceremonial centers. This particular picture is known as Casa Grande. Just to share with you the trading center that was established there. Casa Grande is a central place between Tucson and Phoenix. You can travel and buy it when you're traveling west on Interstate 10 from Tucson. You come to the fork where Interstate 8 goes to San Diego and Interstate 10 goes to Phoenix. and that's what is known as Casa Grande. Again, you understand that a major interstate highway was built there, and it was, that highway was already established in this period, because people are continuously moving back and forth across this desert. So we have to understand again the ingenuity, the scientific appreciation that these peoples had in building their societies on the least likely place on this earth. Okay. Then the third group that we're interested in are the Anasazi. And the Anasazi, perhaps they're the subject of a more romanticized and scientific attention. They left behind thousands of stone houses and piles of discarded goods. They emerged from the archaic era, where they progressed from ecologically sensitive subsistence communities to societies dependent on domesticated corn, beans, and squash. However, the Anasazi were more reluctant than the Hohokam and the Mogollon to stay in one place for so long. They were not as committed to a sedentary agricultural life as those who lived out in the open deserts, such as the Sonoran Desert or the Chihuahua Desert, where the Mogollon are from, and the Hohokam. But by about 500 AD, the Anasazi developed extensive contact with central Mexico. They relied on dry farming, which depended on direct rainfall, and most importantly, the manipulation of moisture. Frequently, their garden plots were places in spots where runoff from summer showers would supplement normal precipitation. And what they did was they funneled runoff water into canals. They funneled runoff water into ditches that led to planted fields. Eventually, it's going to be called akchin, or floodwater farming. This was not irrigation in the usual sense, but it was a judicious means of capturing unpredictable rainfall. So again, as I shared with you, these three cultures, the Mogollon, the Hohokam, the Anasazi, each culture differs in their origins, and they have quite different early histories, but they came late in their stages of development to achieve a sort of homogeneity through contact, through exchange, and through migration. What is important to note, of course, about these Southwest cultures is that all these cultures were based primarily on agriculture in a region that's not at all adapted to farming. So again, water was the key for survival. These Southwest gardeners established flourishing, technologically advanced cultures in the least likely place on the continent. So let's go to a film clip that helps us appreciate at least a particular successive stage in the development of these societies. Let's go and appreciate the Anasazi and take a look at their stonemasonry and understand why they're called the Ancient Ones by the Navajo, and the Pueblo call them their ancestors. Let's go to Chaco Canyon.
When we began our migrations, we came up into this world from the world below. The Creator telling the people that there are certain places that you're to live and giving them signs of recognition to where these sites are to be found. The migrations began over probably a period of centuries. Always looking for that place that was to be the center of our world.
In this land of extremes, the relentless sun soars temperatures to 110 degrees, parching the earth and quieting all life. 6 months later, frigid winds drop temperatures well below zero. in a canyon offering little shelter. And yet here, ancient people chose to construct the center of their world. Buildings of over 700 rooms, originally reaching 4 stories high. And on top of this tower of stone, they marked, with a dagger of light, their knowledge of the sky, a knowledge they would use to guide their construction of a center of cosmology, taking 250 years to complete. The place is a remote canyon in the American Southwest called Chaco. 1,000 years ago, the heart of an ancient Pueblo Indian civilization. These grand buildings have posed a profound mystery for over 100 years of archaeological studies. Why were they built here in this unforgiving place? What was the purpose of their dark, enclosed rooms? And of an arrow straight road to the north? And why, after building these majestic structures, did people deliberately seal them and leave? Recent discoveries reveal an intricate astronomical system here. Clues to Chaco have been held over the centuries in these walls, and in the oral histories carried by the descendant people, the Pueblo Indians of today.
In our history, they talk of things that occurred a long time ago, of people who had enormous amount of power, spiritual power and power over people. I think those types of people lived here in Chaco.
It's a mystery what attracted people to this spare land. In 850 AD, the arid soil in Chaco Canyon supported only small clusters of subsistence farmers. Traces of their modest earth-sheltered dwellings have all but disappeared, leaving no hint of what was to come. Over the next 2.5 centuries, 10 massive buildings were constructed here, built 4 to 5 stories high and containing 3,000 rooms. At the center, the structure known as Pueblo Bonito grew to cover 3 acres, a space that suggests the grandeur of one of the great public buildings of the world. At its completion, Pueblo Bonito was the size of the Roman Colosseum. 12 generations of people devoted themselves to building these elaborate structures under nearly impossible conditions. Food would not grow easily in the canyon, and water was scarce. Building materials had to be transported from distant sites. To craft their exquisite walls, the Chacoan masons cut and hauled thousands of tons of sandstone from the mesa tops above. To raise their buildings to 4 stories, they obtained massive timbers from distant mountains. They transported 220,000 timbers by foot across 50 to 70 miles into the canyon. And all this in a place so barren, it's thought that much of the food to support the thousands of builders had to be imported. The Chacoans crafted elegant pottery and ceremonial objects of inlaid turquoise. The raw materials for these efforts were also brought from distant sites. In these challenging conditions, the Chacoan culture flourished across a vast region. They built communities and roads throughout 95,000 square miles of the American Southwest. They traded with cultures 2,000 to 3,000 miles to the south. Objects of Mesoamerican origin, including parrots and plumed serpents, were found in the buildings of Chaco. To most archaeologists, the impractical choice of building here has been explained by the theory Then it was a trade center, collecting and redistributing goods from a 35,000 square mile area. Over 200 miles of ancient, well-engineered roads connected with the Chaco.
Okay, so that's an amazing experience here with regards to Chaco itself. We're taking a look at just the Anasazi, but there's also the Hohokam and the Mogollon, and they are interacting with the Chaco Canyon. In fact, this particular film, documentary, was made in the 1990s, and evidence has already revealed that Chaco, as well as Paquimé, as well as Chuukshon, which the place where the Hohokam were meeting, they were interacting not only with central Mexico, but also with the Mississippian cultures. And so you can imagine 12 generations dedicating their prayers where they built monuments to reactualize ancient power. These were pilgrimages to respect sacred rituals, and they created the sites by which to do that. And that's the amazingness of Chaco Canyon. So when we take a look at the classic, the pre-classic, the classic period, we can understand central Mexico, here in the southwest, the northern Mexico, the southwest United States, the Mississippian region. When we go down to central Mexico, we go to South America. Use the Caribbean islands as basis for moving from South America up to North America. That's what the Caribbean islands were all about. You follow the Leeward Islands and the Wayward Islands outside of Venezuela and Colombia. Move up north, the British Guiana, French Guiana, move up north, move into Jamaica, Puerto Rico, go up through the islands to Cuba, maybe use the Bahama Islands, skipping up into Florida. What's going to happen, what I'm trying to share with you, is that in the classic period, everything is interconnected. What's most curious, what's very important about the Anasazi, of course, is their stone masonry that was employed for the communal structures of cellular contiguous flat-roofed homes. That's what we saw with regards to the Anasazi. Their buildings ranged in size from several units, sufficient to shelter a few families, to these immense multi-storied apartment complexes, staggered elevations, hundreds of people living and having storage rooms. So again, when we take a look at this experience, everyone is reaching their maximum geographic distributions during the period known as the Classic. So there's a lively, colorful pottery industry that's persisted, with cooking and storing jars being highly prized. So as the film clip shared with you, the Anasazi are the ancestors of the modern day Pueblo people. The Hohokam are the ancestors of the modern day Oatam people. And the Mogollon are the ancestors of the modern day Tarahumara people in Mexico. So let's appreciate something with regards to these societies and the intricate exchanges of goods and services over a vast territory. That's one of the reasons why I like to use the Chaco film clip. So that, so this ends the segment of the Southwest cultures. Now let's move into a segment and let's appreciate the post-classic period.